الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الحكيم وهو أصدق القائلين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I begin in the name of Allah, the most kind, the most merciful. It's due to that kindness and mercy that we have these opportunities where we gather in remembrance and glorification of Him Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. I pray all of you are well, inshaAllah, and going stronger than ever, inshaAllah, as well. Today is my last series from the beginning part. I, inshaAllah, will come back on the nights of Qadr. And so as much as we can finish of this story, we will, and then inshallah we will continue it after the month of Ramadhan, inshallah. Where we left off in the story of Prophet Ayub alayhi salam was that now their physical condition was such that his wife Rahma had no choice but to go and get an employment. And so she would go from house to house, she would clean the houses, she would fetch water, she would sweep, she would take out the trash, and she would do all of these things. All the while, the condition of Ayyub alayhi salam would continue to get worse. But when Iblis, now this is where we see a very active role that Iblis plays, and Iblis here, we have to also understand that Iblis's goal is what? Iblis's goal is just to try to make us fail. Right? And so it tries to create obstacles in our way that will just make the challenge of doing what we have to do that much more difficult. Right? At the end of the day, Iblis doesn't have physical authority to limit what we can do, but all it can do is create doubts. It can create whisperings. And so what Iblis does in this situation is he transforms himself into an elderly man. And he addresses the citizens of Bathna and he says to them, كيف تطيب أنفسكم بامرأة تعالج من زوجها القبح والصديد. Subhanallah, look at what he says. Yeah, he says that how are you guys comfortable having a woman in your house who all day she takes care of her husband and fixes his wounds. Yeah, and so her hands are filthy with the pus and all of these things that she has from this sick person. And then she comes into your house and she cooks your food for you. Yeah? And she fetches water for you. Yeah? Like, aren't you afraid that these type of filth will now enter into your house? And these type of statements made again and again eventually led the people who at least were willing to allow her to come into their house, they even shut that door on them. And now they had nowhere else to go. And you see, like Iblis is like the father of haters. You know what I mean? Like he will find something wrong with anything and then just try to exploit that. And I think that's a really important thing that we have to understand about hating on other people, Like social media has allowed everyone to think that their opinion matters. When in reality not everyone's opinion matters. Right? There are some things that maybe I have an opinion of, but really no one should know about them. No one should care about them, right? But social media allows me to put it in a platform where everyone can read it. Whether you agree with it or not, it has no effect on me, But it's not difficult to find something wrong with something. Yeah, I can tell you that very honestly, right? Like today we'll eat a nice iftar. Iftar was paid for. Yeah, iftar was served to us. We may have had to stand in line. We didn't have to go out. My wife didn't have to cook, but I bet you we can find something wrong with it. Yeah, salt was too much. It ran out. This happened. Man, you're not a genius by picking faults. Yeah, you're not superior to other people by picking faults, right? It's that ability to look past the things that are wrong and find the beautiful. That's what makes a person better. Yeah, that's what makes a person superior in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so simply hating, like I feel that when we just hate and it just becomes a normal part of it, we're just doing the work of shaitan. Because shaitan's the father of haters, right? He just finds something wrong and exploits it until that person loses all advantage. And so now all doors are closed from them, right? They have nowhere to go, and his condition gets worse to that extent where the smell, according to these traditions, say that his smell from his body was so strong that people threatened to expel him. Yeah, literally, like they threatened to kick him out of his own city. And so before that would happen, he asked his wife Rahma that they should just move, or at least move him to the outskirts of the town where the people used to throw their trash. Yeah, the dumping grounds. Now again, think about this. This is a Nabi of Allah. Yeah, and so she says that he suggests to her that why don't you go to the crossroads of the town and wait for somebody, a new person to come by who doesn't know what's happened to me, and just ask them for some help and maybe they can come. And so she agrees to do that. But before she does, she goes to this dumping ground, and within that area she creates a small little nook for him to rest at. Yeah, it's a nook made of dirt and stones or whatever it is. They didn't have anything left, but it was in those dumping grounds. And then she went out to the crossroads as her husband, the Prophet of God, had asked. And there she saw these two men walk by who displayed this baha, like this aura about them, with a beautiful smell or a scent emitting from them. And they, before she could speak, they spoke and said, وَأَيْنَ أَيُّوب خَلِيلُنَا وَصِدِّيقُنَا وَكَيْفَ هُوَ عَلَى بَلَائِهِ. He says that how is our brother and our friend Ayyub? Yeah? And how is he handling the difficulties that God has put him through? And so she began to reply to him and tell him that this is something that is the condition that he was going. And she said to them, pray that Allah gives him afiyah. Yeah, again, this is a good dua, right? Afiyah, is like this all-encompassing dua. I forget this tradition, but it's a tradition from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. Salli ala Muhammad. Where it's a very short dua, where he says that everyone should ask this dua every single day. I'll try to find the exact words, but I believe the beginning is Allahumma inni as'aluka al-afiyah. That all I ask for afiyah. Yeah? And afiyah is this, we recite it sometimes in our sajda, right? Ya wali al-afiyah, nas'aluka al-afiyah, afiyat ad-dini wa dunya wal akhirah. But this afiyah is this really all-encompassing grace of God. That it is general enough to where it can work in every situation, right? So keep this dua always in mind, that asking Allah for afiyah, right? Now, of course, He will provide the afiyah. We have to do the right things with that afiyah. But here again, she asks for them to make this dua of afiyah, and then they say to them, فَإِذَا رَجَعْتِ, they say to her, فَإِذَا رَجَعْتِ إِلَيْهِ فَأَقْرِيهِ مِنَّ السَّلَامِ. That when you go back to him, give him our salam. They didn't introduce themselves or anything, but in the shyness and in the abruptness of this event, the fact that they knew him and it shocked her or whatever, she forgot to ask them what she wanted to ask, which is, come help me move him out, right? And so she goes back to Ayyub alayhi salam, and she describes to him what happened, and his reply was, wa shawqa ilayka ya Jibreel wa ya shawqa ilayka ya Mikail. He says that these were the two angels of Allah, Jibreel and Mikael, who had passed by this town. And he says, oh my longing to see these two angels of God. Yeah. And then he says to his wife, Ya Rahma, waman mithluki al-an waqad kallamatkil malaika. That who is like you, O Rahma, that you have been blessed to speak with angels. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So she once again went out to go find somebody to help. This time we are told in this tradition that there were 4 angels who came. And she found 4 people who were angels, and they themselves volunteered to come and assist him. And so they came towards Prophet Ayub alayhi salam. فَأَقْبَلُوا حَتَّى وَقَفُوا عَلَىٰ Ayyub. They came close to Ayyub until they stopped by him. And they said to him, وَصَبَّرُوهُ عَلَى بَلَائِهِ وَدَعَوْا لَهُ بِالْعَافِيَةِ. They asked him and they continued to encourage him to be patient at all of these difficulties that he is enduring. And they prayed afiyah for him, and they moved him to the outskirts of this town. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. My humble request that don't shake my hand today, inshallah. Yeah? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And so life continues in this way, right? And Rahma, obviously, they come to this dumping ground, and she lays him down on this dirt, and she makes this comment, where it's not a complaint, right? But it's a comment of affection, where she says, Ayyub, sleep on this dirt when previously you used to sleep on a mattress. Yeah? Lay your head on this rock, while previously you used to lay your head on something else. It was almost a loving wife, saying to her husband, like, if I could do more for you, I would do more for you. But again, there's a lesson, where Ayyub says that do not recall. It says, did I not tell you, alam anhaki an dhikri shay'im min na'im dunya? He says that did we not caution each other, or did I not caution you to not think of our past blessings of this world? Yeah, because that can make a person very much bitter to what they are going through now. And this is again, I think, a very important lesson, that after we enjoy any type of relative goodness, if that goodness begins to go away from us and difficulties come in our way, if we constantly look back and revert back to say, that was so much better, this was so much better, right? We will constantly live in a state of anxiety and despair. We will never have any type of gratefulness, right? The expectation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that in every moment that we go through, we have to ensure that we maximize that opportunity at that time, never really thinking about the past and what had come to us at that time or what we may have gone through. And so again, this is another really important lesson, that life at one time or the other, I'm sure, was good, and whatever tests we're going to doesn't mean that life is no longer good, but make the most of what we are enjoying now. So with no one to help them and no one to give her a job, no one to provide food, they're in the outskirts, they decided to move to the next city of Hawran. Remember, he was the prophet of 2 cities, Bathna and Hawran. And so they moved to this next city, and she was able to, with great difficulty, move him. And so they moved him, and she took him to the outskirts of the city, left him by the gates of that city, asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect him, and she entered the city and she called out at the gates of the city, Allah man arada ghasla thiyabin aw khirakin aw kanasin aw kansidar aw hamlit turab ila manzilihi min manzilatin أو استسقاء ماء بشيء من الطعام أحمله إلى نبي الله أيوب. She says that is there anyone who صلوا على محمد وآل محمد أحسنت محمد وآل محمد, where he says that is there anyone who needs their clothes washed, their house cleaned, water carried, floors swept, anything. She says that all I ask in exchange for my days of work is some food. Yeah, that's the state. It wasn't even about money anymore. It was just about getting something to eat so that she could feed her husband who had lost strength entirely. Here there's a lengthy hadith where the people first came out not knowing who she was, and they retorted back very negatively until it was identified that she was a daughter of the prophets and she was wanting to assist her husband who was a prophet. And so they gave her an opportunity to work, and so she began to work, and she worked in 5 different homes and had enough money to buy, in this tradition says, 10 loaves of bread. And so life continued in this way. And his health was still bad, but they continued to strive and deal with what was happening. Until now, we see something drastic take place. And here, we'll try to cover these 2 tests and then end and then leave the rest for whenever life allows. So it says, فَبَيْنَمَا رَحْمَةُ ذَاتِ يَوْمٍ رَاجِعَةٌ مِنَ الْقَرْيَةِ إِلَى Ayyub. That day that as she had worked in the homes and was now returning back to Ayyub. وَإِذَا هِيَ بإبليس اللعين قد عرض لها في سورة طبيب. That Iblis came to her in the form of a doctor. Yeah, that's what she was looking for, isn't it? She was looking for someone to heal her husband, and so he came in that opportune dress. وآلت ومعه آلة الطب, and he had a bag that he had his medicine and things in there. وقال للرحمة إني أقبلت من فلسطين حين سمعت بخبر زوجك أيوب جئت لأداوي. He says that I heard about the situation of Ayyub all the way in Philistine. Right? So they're in Sham, or in Bathna, which is all part of Sham. Even Palestine is part of Sham. But you can imagine where Damascus is and where Palestine is. So they're just saying that this is where he came from. And he says that I'm here to treat him. Now, I want you to keep in mind, the next couple of stories seem like, how could she fall for that kind of stories? But you have to keep in mind, number one, she had no idea this was Iblis. You know what I mean? This was a person who, from all apparent signs, was a person who was a doctor. Yeah, and he was there to cure. And so she had no reason to not believe that he was there to assist her, and this is how, in today's world, this is how scammers get people, you know what I mean? They call you and they'll try 100 times until they get that one old sweet lady who's convinced that she needs this money and then trick her, right? Or an old guy who's willing to give his retire. And this is where none of these people expected this to happen. She never expected this to be Iblis, right? And so Iblis says to her that I will cure him from everything and I will come tomorrow. But from today, tell him to take a bird and يأخذ أسفورا فيذهبه فيذبحه ولا يذكر اسم الله عليه. Yeah? He says that tell him to eat a bird and to catch a bird and slaughter it, but to not say the name of God when he catches that bird. Yeah? وَيَأْكُلُهُ وَيَشْرَبُ عَلَيْهِ قَدَحًا مِنْ خَمَرٍ, and then he should drink some alcohol or some wine. وَيَطْلِي نَفْسَهُ بِالدَّمِ, and he should cover his body with blood. فَإِنَّ فَرَجَهُ مِنْ ذَلِكَ, because his relief from this difficulty will be based on these things. Yeah, like I said, today we look at this and we're like, astaghfirullah, rahmah. Yeah, how could you fall for these? Man, we've fallen for much worse. Yeah, we have been tricked by much worse. We know things are haram, but how many business deals which are haram are made when a person is going through difficulty? She was in absolute desperation, right? And so when a person is absolutely desperate, their rational thinking abilities get muted. Yeah, it doesn't disappear, but it just gets muted, right? And so when an option is presented to them for them to come out of their difficulty, it seems very attractive, right? She obviously wouldn't do it, but at the same time, I want us to think about our own lives, right? We fall prey to peer pressure from friends to do things which are haram, right? Yet we know they are haram, yet we do it, right? How many haram relationships have been forged in times of desires, right? How many acts of cheating, lying, etc. are made when we are looking for a way out? In fact, like the sad part is, like, it's not only us that in times of desperation try to seek an avenue out, but many of us are guilty of this even just to satisfy our desires, So even though I'm not desperate, but if I have an opportunity to satisfy my desire and find a way out of it, I will try to look for a loophole, won't I? Right? Like, how many times have we said, like, I have to go to this business meeting, I will split the table so my table has no alcohol, right? Is that a way out? Yeah, it's a way out. But isn't that something that I did? There was no desperation. It was just me wanting to be at that meeting, right? How many times do we try to find out if gelatin has undergone some type of chemical formation just so that I can have a drink that has gelatin in there? Man, we do this all the time. I get these calls all the time, okay? And these are not even in chaotic life, desperate moments. These are just moments for me to satisfy my desire. Now you rev that up to a person who is desperate. Things sound attractive to people when they're desperate, right? This is where you can trick anyone who is desperate. And what you also have to realize is that, like, this is one of the tricks of shaitan, right? Shaitan is there to make attractive to us that which is haram because our souls desire it. Yeah? And Allah talks about this in the Quran, right? But even when He spoke to Adam, like the story of Adam often gets us confused, right? Because on one hand, like, God says, don't go to that tree. And on the other hand, this person, and God says, this person is your enemy, don't listen to him. So all the warnings were given. But yet, Iblis was able to trick Adam. And you wonder how that could happen, right? Because he comes very convincingly. Yeah, I want us to realize that. Like, he comes very convincingly. Like the fact that we can do something. Again, I want this to be very relatable to us because none of us are perfect, and we should get out of the mindset of judging. But man, we've been convinced of more, like, things for far less in our past, right? And so when Iblis spoke to Adam, what did he say? Allah says, وَقَاسَمَهُمَا. He swore to Allah that he's telling the truth. You know what I mean? We've been tricked like this in many Arab countries in the past, haven't we? Wallahi, brother, I tell you. Yeah, this is how much it is. And you're like, oh, okay, wallah. He said, wallah, let's do it. Yeah? And then you find out you paid double the price. And so we've been tricked by small shayateen. Imagine big shaitan himself, right? And how powerful shaitan is. So she comes back to Ayyub. And he understood what had just happened. Obviously, she wasn't telling him go and drink alcohol, but she just said, hey, I met this guy who said all of these things. And so Ayyub replies back, in the same way that he would. He says, Mata ra'ayti an ashrab al-khamar wa a'kulu mimma la yuzkar ismallah. He says, when have you ever seen me drink alcohol? When have you ever seen me eat something without the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And so he says, Ya rahma bil ams kunti rasulatan min Jibreel wa Mikail wa anti al-yawm rasulatan min Iblis al-la'in. Subhanallah, yeah? He says, yesterday you were the messenger to me for Jibreel and Mikail. Today you are a messenger for me with Iblis. He says, Rahma, I don't want you to speak to him again, right? And so they let this chapter close. But we know shaitan does not stop, yeah? And so shaitan had another plan. And this plan was even more outlandish. It sounds more outlandish, yeah? Where he comes in suratin rajulin bahi'is surah وَحَسَنِ الْوَجْهِ, like a person who had this beautiful face and with a lot of pomp and glory, like somebody who's dressed in a fancy way, somebody who seems to be quite majestic in the way he appears. And as he passes Rahma, he says, كَأَنِّي أَعْرِفُكِ أَلَسْتِ رَحْمَةَ بِنْتَ أَفَارِيم نَبِيِّ اللَّهِ. So he stops her and says that, I think I know you, right? Like, aren't you Rahma, the daughter of the Prophet? And she says, yes. She's like, I heard a lot of bad things have happened to you. And so he asks, لِأَيِّ شَيْءٍ أَصَابَتْكُمْ هَذِهِ الْمَصَائِبِ. Like, what was the reason that all of these things happened to you? And so she says that لِأَنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى أَرَادَ أَن يُجَرِّبُ صَبْرَنَا عَلَى بَلَائِهِ. That Allah wanted to test our patience with all of these tests. So he said, بِئْسَ مَا قُلْتِ. He said, you're absolutely wrong in what you're saying. Yeah? He says, وَلَكِنَّ إِلَهَ السَّمَاءِ هُوَ اللَّهِ وَإِلَهَ الْأَرْضِ أَنَا. Yeah? Look at what he does here. Yeah? He says that you have been completely misinformed. He said that the Lord of the heavens is Allah, and the Lord of the earth is me. Yeah? He says, I am Allah. Right? It's interesting, right? Like this concept. Like if you watch, or if you read some of the biblical accounts, especially when it comes to the representation of the devil in movies and things like this is how it makes it sound. Where the devil has complete reign over hell, and God has complete reign over heaven, and they're fighting with each other. When that's furthest from the truth, right? Like the entire domain is God's, and he's just a resident of hell. But here, his approach is very unique here. He says that, look, I am the Lord of the earth. He's like, I wanted you to worship me, but you chose to worship the Lord of the heavens. And in turn, I took away all your worldly gifts. Yeah? So he puts it to himself, yeah? But he says, if you had worshipped me, all these worldly things would have stayed with you. But because you chose to worship the Lord of the heavens, you'll get yours in heaven. But in dunya, you lose everything because you should have worshipped me. And he says that I have taken your children, your house, your animals, your property, everything, and I have kept it in a valley, and I will return it back to you once you begin to worship me. Yeah? And then, it sounds far-fetched, right? But then he says, you don't believe me? He says, come, I'll show you your things. Yeah? And so he walks with her for a distance, and he's able to make her eyes see things, I guess you can say. Trick her eyes, and in front of her, she saw her children. Yeah? She saw her property. She saw everything there. And now it's not just him telling you that this is the Lord, I am the Lord of the earth, but now he's showing you that I have all your possessions with me, right? Now, this trick of Iblis, is powerful, right? It's powerful. And I really think it happens to us all the time too. You know what I mean? When acts of haram seem attractive to us, what else is that except for the trick of shaitan convincing our eyes that these things will bring me joy? When inshallah in the Laylatul Qadr nights, I'm going to be doing a khutbah or sharh of a khutbah of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And he says this very point in there where heaven is surrounded by heartache, yeah, by fighting off our desires. That's how heaven is earned, right? Because these things are very attractive, right? The opposite gender, very attractive. Going out and doing things, very attractive. This is why we all fall victim. A lot of people not. A lot of people fall victim to it, right? And so even though we know something is inappropriate, and it's not just about haram, even if something, for example, is allowed. Let's say wealth is allowed. No one says wealth is haram, right? Wealth is allowed. But also I know that for me to attain sustainable and good amount of wealth, I may have to cut a corner or two. that trick is done by shaitan. Right? To say that one small thing gives you a big thing in the end, that's all right, you know. It's that whole adage, right? That if I win the lottery, I'll give half in sadaqah, right? Great, you know, but it's still haram. The whole thing is haram. You know what I mean? Doesn't matter how much you give, the whole thing is haram. This time, he tricks her in this way, but Rahma doesn't buy into it. And she says, I have to go talk to Ayyub, you know. Again, it's important for us not to judge her faith because, again, she's in an act of desperation. But this was this concept that he presented, it seemed as though it seemed attractive to her. That I can get my children back, I can get my family back. And no, she wasn't convinced of it, but it just seemed attractive to her. And this is where I think a lot of us are, if we can graduate from this level, life becomes a lot easier. So look, there's a level where we fall victim to sin. And that's, let's just say this is the platform, this is below the platform. This is the level where we fall victim to sin. Inshallah, none of us are at this platform anymore. We've graduated to a level where we don't sin. We know it's haram, we don't do it, right? And then there's another level before ascension where the haram is still attractive to me, but I don't do it. Yeah? If we can pass that level and go to that next level, life becomes a lot better. Yeah, a lot better. Where the haram doesn't even seem attractive to me anymore, right? And that's where I think, inshallah, we should try to get to. I want to end very quickly. I have 3 minutes, inshallah. Yeah. She goes back to Ayyub, and this time Ayyub says, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji." He says, "Ya Rahma, like, what are you coming with me with?" Yeah, she's like, "I asked you not to speak to Iblis," and so she says, "I didn't know it was Iblis," right? But this time he gets angry and he does something really, like, we have to understand this. I want to do it here because when I do it again later, it'll be a smaller crowd. He says that when I get better, I will punish you with 100 lashes. Yeah? And it's this last point that I want to talk about because the Quran mentions it. This is not a hadith. So the Quran says in Surah As-Sad, verse number 44, وَخُذْ بِيَدِكَ ضِعْثًا فَاضْرِبْ بِهِ وَلَا تَحْنَتْ. He says, and take your hand a bunch of grass and strike with it, and do not break your oath. Allah is addressing Prophet Ayub here. What becomes really clear here is that Ayub had promised to strike someone, yeah, to punish somebody. Allah says, out of His mercy, that don't punish with strength, but rather replace that leash or whatever, the whip, with 100 strands of grass, and just whip her or whip once, and that's 100. So you see the mercy of God, yeah. But what the verse doesn't tell us is who it was that deserved punishment, and this is where the hadith tells it. It was Rahma, yeah. Now the question is why. So I want to answer this. Number one, she was the Prophet of God, the daughter of the Prophet of God. Her faith should have been better. Yeah? The more we've been given by God, the more expectation there is. And her faith should have been better. This is a lesson for all of you Sadat here, you know? That you've been given something extra than what we've been given. Y'all better be careful. Yeah? Number two, he was the Prophet of God, right? And only he can exert this type of punishment. That means what that means is that you and I can't go around saying, do this or I'll whip you 100 times. Yeah? We don't have that authority. Only a hakim al-shari, the one who is the legislator, has this authority, right? And it can't be done on random things, but it has to be a violation of divine authority. And the last point I think that makes sense is that he had warned her multiple times. And so punishment of some sort or the other is an aid in fighting our desires or fighting our mistakes. And this is why muraqabah is such a big part of our lives. That if, for example, you can't wake up for Salatul Fajr, then set a punishment of maybe 100 push-ups or $100 in sadaqah. Something that will hurt you. And if you pay that punishment, your frequency in repeating that act that you want to avoid will be less, eventually it will be non-existent. This is where we'll leave the story. We'll come back to it inshallah if Allah gives us life in the coming weeks after Shahrul Ramadan. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the return of our Imam, to forgive the sins of our parents and loved ones, those going through difficulty, that He end their difficulty, those that have asked us to pray for them, Ya Allah accept their hajat. And finally, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we leave the month of Ramadan as better servants than we entered it. Rahimallahu man kara'a سورة المباركة الفاتحة مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.